Well, thanks so much for everybody joining our SaaS Connect roundtables. Really happy that they're back. Some of you may know me, some of you may not. I'm Lindsay Ward. I'm the Managing Director of the Cloud Software Association. And we have some great leaders on with us tonight for our SaaS Connect roundtable. What we're really going to be chatting about is fueling API ecosystems with data products. And I just want to let you guys know that we do have quite a few events coming up with CSA. As you might know, next month, November 17th, we have our very first SaaS Connect UK. And we also have our SaaS Connect US that is starting to open up for 2023. That's going to be April 19th and 20th. So if you guys have any questions about getting involved in SaaS Connect US in San Francisco, feel free to send by a message and let me know in Slack or by email. And if you're looking to get involved in SaaS Connect UK next month, definitely send me a message on Slack or email, and I can get you guys the registration for that. But I'm going to continue letting in our roundtable members. Again, I do definitely recommend that everybody keep their camera on so that we can all have a great conversation together. And I'm going to hand it off to our two roundtable leaders. We've got Allan here, and we also have Michael. Guys, I'm going to let you take it over and introduce yourselves.
Okay, lovely. Thanks, Lindsay. So I'm Allan Knabe. I'm up here in Helsinki. Like I said, it's already nice and dark outside here. So my background specifically is, I started my career in databases, so writing PL/SQL scripts, so like heavy data manipulation back then, moving into CRM with like Siebel and Salesforce. Until more recently getting into the whole API thing over the last 10 years or so. So more recently, I started a company called APIable, and we help organizations to build API portals. So the discoverability of the APIs is what we're into. Michael?
Cool, yeah. Good morning, good evening. My name is Michael Leppitsch. I work for a startup called Ascend.io. We're a platform that people use to produce data products specifically. So this is very near and dear to my heart. In terms of background, I probably managed one of the first APIs in the energy industry that was created in the 90s for grid operators and utilities to communicate with each other. It was a brand new world at the time, but that led me into working with APIs, working for Apogee, getting to know Allan in that context. And then through Google, ended up back here in startup land. So glad to be here. Glad to see lots of innovators here as well, and ready to get into it. So we've teed up a couple of questions to seed our conversations with, and hopefully these resonate with everybody here. But by all means, the whole idea here is for us to, jump in and have a conversation.
Right.
First of all, speaking directly to our topic, APIs, ecosystems, and data products. Allan, give us a little bit of color on how you would actually define an API ecosystem.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah. When I think of API ecosystem, I like to go straight back to the start and think of like mashups, right? I mean, if you remember mashups, that was a long time ago, and we haven't used that word very often since. But for me, that was the beginning of these API ecosystems, which is effectively saying, okay, we have APIs. If we give them to other customers or partners, we can see, okay, well, what are they doing with these, right? What can they build? What can they create? It's about building apps with services that you wouldn't necessarily have access to otherwise, right? So that's at its most like fundamental level, is getting APIs out there, getting different people using them. So leading on from there, I think where the API ecosystem is more like the grown-up version of that. And here we're talking about value, right? So we're talking about value for the API provider. We're talking about value for the consumer of the API, and basically value for everybody involved. So it can be a customer or a partner involved in the journey as well. So that's really where we're talking about like ecosystem in this case. So yeah, that's where we've been trending for the last years. But what I really like to think about nowadays is talking about the digital supply chains. So we all know supply chains from, for example, the automotive industry. So you've got BMW, for example, who they don't build every single component on a car that comes off the assembly line. I think they actually only build a small percentage of it. So there'll be the chassis, but all of the parts on the car, like door handles and switches and things like that, that comes from other places, right? Other smaller companies who make a specific thing to get a specific job done within that like overall supply chain. And what we're seeing nowadays is especially if you start a new business, I just started my own company, and a lot of things we didn't build from scratch. Some things, our core business, we built from scratch, of course. But when it comes to, for example, sending an SMS or an email, then you're talking to Twilio, SendGrid, these kind of people who have like these APIs, right? And that's what we're really talking about in this newer context of like APIs is ecosystems, digital supply chains, and also platforms come into that quite a lot as well. Two-sided platforms with consumers and producers. So batting the ball back in your direction, Michael, what's your definition of a data product in this context?
Yeah, I love that we're actually leading with the API conversation, because I think that was earlier in the evolution. And then out of that crystallized this idea that some data sets are valuable in business, right? And so this idea of a data product emerged as a subset of APIs. Like you can imagine, some APIs are very transactional, some are, webhooks, very tactical things, and some are actually data sets that have value. And so even there, as you tease that apart, some data sets have value, but what we did about 10 years ago, a lot of executives took a shortcut and said, great, we can make money with these data sets, let's monetize data sets. And that was a bit of a false flag, right? Because it turns out that data sets are valuable in different ways, not just for ringing a till. So I think we're now evolved to the point where some data sets you can charge for, sure, but a lot of data sets, data products get exchanged to drive business forward. Like if I were to download a catalog of inventory at a local grocery store or local hardware store, I want that for free, right? Because that's going to lead to a transaction of me actually buying, filling a shopping cart, et cetera. And that's a different data set. So the common denominator, though, is value. And what's interesting about value is there has to be an agreement of what that value looks like. And I think that's where we get to the idea that these data products actually need to be designed. You can't just take your database and dump it out, right, through an API and expect the other person the developer on the other side that's on the other side of the API to know what to do with it, So designing an API, this actually goes back to one of your topics, Allan, is the API contract, APIs as a contract. This is kind of a subset of that, not just what's the format, am I using JSON or CSV, right? Those mechanics of it, but actually the semantics of it. Like, what does data mean? How do I use it? And those data products have to be designed and need to be built. So while, yes, there might be a database behind the API that has that data in it, designed that way, it didn't get there by accident, right? It actually got built and designed. And that's why I think you thought of inviting me to this conversation, because Ascend is one of those platforms where you take inputs from many different systems, external, internal, inventory systems, transactional systems, customer systems, whatever you have. And you're designing data sets and actually through data pipelines is what we call them, build data sets that are then delivered to customers and to users through APIs. And so that's kind of where the two fit together, right? The data products and the API piece as a way of distributing and reaching the customer.
That's it, yeah. And I think, taking that concept and looking back at what we've done with data in the past, like you already mentioned, we went from, taking a database table and saying, okay, that's an API, okay, expose it and hope that someone can understand it. And use it. That's what we did in the beginning. And I still see examples of that today, right? Where you look at an API and sometimes you can't even understand what it's supposed to do, because the internal complexity of the IT system is 100% exposed in the API, right? And the consumer has absolutely no way of understanding that data, right? And that's where we're making good progress, because again, coming back to that word value, what we're starting to do now is when we think of the API as a product, so data products, is actually go to the partner or the customer and say, okay, look, we've been giving you this data for so long now. What are you actually doing with it? And asking why 5 times until you get to like the root cause of, you know, why they would need the data in the first place. Sometimes it's purely like they're doing CRUD, so they're just copying, you know, instead of copying from one application and pasting it in another application, you're providing that, and that's fine. But in other cases, you find that customers are solving business problems with your data. And when you identify that, and you identify that pain point that they're having, you can then potentially create an API product or a data product around that problem and say, okay, look, this is the problem, this is the solution, package it as a product, and then find other customers and partners who have that problem and you know, go to them. And that's, yeah, exactly what Michael is talking about there. It's effectively, you know, going beyond just siloed bits of data and saying, okay, well, again, I love that word mashup, so I'm going to use it again, but, you know, bringing everything together and saying, okay, now we've got value. Now we can approach customers. And it goes, you know, from an API being merely sort of this extra thing that you have in your organization that some partners ask for or some customers ask for, to being like a really strategic, valuable thing that you can either use to, yeah, monetize. We've mentioned that you can make additional revenue from it, or then yeah, you're strategically locking in customers because you're providing this value and no one else is doing that. So that's what we're looking at there. And so Batting, if you want to jump in at any point, yeah, guys, with any questions, or you know, you have your own stories, then please feel free to jump on the stage. I have basically one more question that I'd like to ask Michael, and it's like, how do companies then build those data products?
Yeah. So taking what you just said about discovering valuable data sets that you can fuel ecosystems with. I mean, let's just take an example, right? American Airlines, you know, has seats available to go from here to between New York and San Francisco. That's a data set. But they want to deliver that data set not just to an individual, just to one company, but to an entire, you know, ecosystem, really, of people who actually interface with the customer, whether it's business travel platforms or kayak.com or booking.com, right? All these, that's an ecosystem going outbound from American Airlines perspective. But you flip that around, and booking.com, for example, would want to see the similar data sets, right? Cohesive data sets from all the airline providers, right? So now you have an ecosystem where people can agree on what these data products should look like and how they get exchanged and what they consist of. So everybody can converge on doing business much more efficiently and in a timely and accurate manner. And the workload of developers actually drops, right? Instead of doing lots of point-to-point integrations, now you actually can develop a bit of a platform that is able to onboard new airlines very easily, right? Or onboard new booking platforms very easily. That's the ecosystem part that I think is super powerful in this combination with data products and APIs, right? You got to have both, and both need to be very carefully designed and built. So to answer your question on the data product side of that, companies internally, any of those players will internally have completely different architectures and systems and operational systems. So to get from, you know, some database schema or file system that they're using internally to that API and then building those data sets requires quite a bit of work. Some of the customers that we work with that deliver data products into ecosystems have hundreds of steps, you know, of this logic that converge data, merge data. One of the older strategies that's probably familiar to everyone is star schemas, right? Where just put everything together, you resolve all your referential integrities in this massive ETL until you can actually pick out a piece of data. We've moved to a more tactical approach with these data pipelines, where you're not solving for the entire star schema at once. You're solving for one business problem at a time. And so you build one pipeline that gets data from these different systems, composes that step by step, and then makes that the back end of an API. And you can deliver, say, the seats that are available between cities in North America, but you can't yet develop your international flights because that's a different system, et cetera. But that's okay. You can get started, right? You don't have to solve everything at once. And I think that's the power of data pipelines today is these modern platforms like Ascend.io allow you to very tactically solve problems very quickly, get data pipelines built within a couple of days, be trialing with customers. Hey, is this data set good? Do we need to tweak it? Very iterative, rapid development and agile approaches to actually running your entire business, right? Not just developing software. So that's a big shift, I think, in how people think about data products, and makes it part of a way of thinking about the whole business as a very agile and constantly innovating business. Thanks for the question, though. Does that resonate with anybody on the call here?
I think that's very interesting because we've seen APIs become a non-negotiable with SaaS. It's something that we all need, that we've all taken part in, that we've all helped to build. But data products, we've kind of seen that shift in the last few years to companies even pivoting their primary objective and services to providing that data to their customers. But I am curious, like Kelly, for example, have you identified any data products that you could be positioning to customers?
Well, I mean, that's all we do. Our API is data enrichment insights. So very specific, purpose built for the insurance ecosystem, and for where we can inject obviously clean on every point of the customer journey when you're thinking about going out and what you do to go out and get insurance. The thing that insurance moves very slow.
That's true.
And me, as I am running our partnerships and alliances program, I'm really trying to identify new areas where, and in fintech is a financial services, fintech, whichever way you want to say it, there's opportunity for our data to be leveraged. Think about, in a mortgage, when you go out and look for a mortgage loan or any kind of loan, really, we pre-fill a lot of that data to make it very easy for the customer journey. So I'm really trying to identify how I tap into new markets. I mean, I know how to tap into new markets and new ecosystems. You just, get engaged and you have conversations, but what is going to be most powerful, and how do you kind of get from a new opportunity to close sooner, leveraging your APIs and taking part of that integration? I mean, we're a no code, low code. So it's very easy to integrate our APIs, Perl, into any workflow. So
that's interesting. I'd have a question there, Kelly. To what extent are you productizing those APIs? I mean, you said your whole thing is around APIs, but I mean, using product management techniques to build your APIs.
Yeah, a lot of it's, again, based on insurance. So it's very specific, purpose built on what anybody has to go through and data they provide at along the customer journey. So you think about, we build those specifically to tackle those customer journey, customer acquisition problems. Because if you think about it, you go online, you start to fill out your information potentially for a new insurance quote, and you come to the question of, okay, well, what's your VIN number on your car, for example? That's data that we already have. So with a name and an address, we can pre-fill all of that data, making it you're like, well, that's great. All you have to do is validate, did this car change? Did I just recently get rid of it? I mean, again, maybe it was like 2 weeks ago. So, the data gets updated, depending on the data. It could be monthly, it could be quarterly. But so we very purpose-built these APIs for those specific things. So we could certainly productize and do something different for a different industry. That's more a question of, okay, are we really ready to do that? Or are we still in this phase? And I think that we're still in this phase of tackling, the insurtech space and those legacy systems to make it very easy for a customer to go out and get a new insurance quote. And that's with home, that's small business, and that even expands to life too.
I think that's such a great point, because you could identify an area where you could productize that data, but there's a certain point where you know that you're ready to do it and that you do have the capacity and the team to be able to build it. So when you identify it, at what point do you decide to make that a product? It's
a hard one. And then do you pivot your entire focus for potentially for that one partner or that one customer? And then all of your focus then goes from doing what you're doing with, which is very purpose built, to then pivoting, supporting this other. And are you, unless you have some type of contract and there's money involved, it's really hard to do, because you've got to stay focused to generate revenue on what you have, what I like to sell on the truck. Like, what do we have to sell on the truck today? That kind of thing. So,
yeah. What do we have in stock?
What do we have in stock? What's on the shelf, right?
Exactly.
I'm not going to get much love from, my CTO or, my development team to say, hey, go build this now. Well, wait a second, what's the ROI? What are we going to get out of this? What's in it for us, kind of thing. So it's an interesting, challenge at times. And really I'm trying to just speed up the process and get more visibility around our APIs. And it's kind of my whole, what I've been doing for the last, year, just really trying to get visibility to them and how people can leverage them, companies, partners, etc. That's why I struggle too with, and I'd love to hear you guys' opinion. I struggle with I worked for a previous data company prior to coming on board to this startup, but I mean, are we really seeing the API marketplaces where there's data available, there's those data sets available where people are really leveraging them in AWS or Databricks or Snowflake, those marketplaces? I'd love to hear if people are really having success selling their API data products in those marketplaces.
That's a great question. The marketplaces themselves, I think that's a little bit of a separate, I guess I haven't done that research, but I'll tell you that we do have multiple customers running on Ascend today that have that exact problem you're talking about, right? They're especially startups that bring a new type of insights to market. We have one company that is a customer on Ascend, delivering insights to the grocery world, right? There's just retail, how to do placement, what type of customers are shopping when, a lot of insights that they slice and dice. And so they built the insights based on their own IP, right? But then when they sign up a massive new company like Kroger or Safeway, that company inevitably comes to them and say, no, we want to do things a little bit different, right? And so they get into the business of having their core value prop and those data products, but then it's like spinning off branches of them. And so that's how they think about that. And that's how they manage that on the Ascend, so that they keep some relevance around these core products that they have. And it becomes more of like, what do we only need to change for Safeway and for Kroger, but still run a core engine with a core IP without creating like a ton of products, data products, each one of which now becomes its own little snowflake, right? And you have to manage it as a separate product and you have to develop it. So yeah, I think there's still a ways to go between that scenario and actually transactional marketplaces that are delivering data products at volume. That said, we get that question all the time. Do we work with those marketplaces? Can I hook up my data product to these marketplaces? And the answer is yes, absolutely. But in terms of commercial success, I haven't heard that much. I think it's more about facilitating partnerships through those marketplaces than it is to generate brand new revenue streams. Kind
of like a vanity, a little bit, maybe a vanity play too, right? You're in there. It's kind of like it's good to be in there how many opportunities is it really, how much revenue is it really generating? That's the big question. So
Yeah.
Right, and that's one thing that we've been struggling with the APIs for the last like 10 years, right? I mean, Michael worked at Apigee, as he said earlier, and they built this like monetization engine. When I was working at Swisscom, we bought that, and it was perfectly fine. It worked really well, but we really struggled to find a good case where we could use it, right? Where we could really say, okay, this is why we're going to charge per API call or data volume or whatever. We really struggled for a long time. I think we're only just getting there now. And the key difference is, okay, business case, right? We never had a business case in the past. Now, treating things as products, we have business cases for why we want to use them, which is good. Again, going out and talking to customers, finding pain points and being able to address them, right? This is all just product management techniques that we're using. And specifically in the insurance case as well, I have one customer I'm working with now who wants to set up an insurance marketplace, a specific insurance marketplace, right? He sees like there's massive untapped market there for that. I can connect you two guys as well, so you can have a conversation about that, where he's basically looking at what the whole fintech people are doing and how far in front they are, and he's trying to like basically for the insurance industry catch up a little bit, and it is still very slow. I've worked with a couple of companies now who have insurance like APIs, more transactional APIs, and they're incredibly complicated. And you have to make like 100 API calls just to get one insurance quote. So there's a lot of things we can do there to improve it. And I think it's worth sticking with it. I think it's going to happen.
I think one key dynamic I think that's playing into this whole thing right now is it used to take a lot of investment to get this infrastructure stood up. But with the emergence of SaaS platforms like Ascend and like APIable, and like you can turn on these services to at least prototype and get these things running, and then start to prove that there's a business for that data product for your company with a few customers, and you can ramp up your investment over time versus what used to do. It really used to take a lot of money just to get to the first API call, but that's dramatically changed, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's what we've seen as well. I mean, that's why we started the company, because we 2 times I've spent 9 months building API portals for organizations. It's not what you want to do. It's not your core business. So we wanted to get the APIs out to the world so people could use them. So that's what we provide, right? This API portal where you can basically just bring it up in one day and have it running, and either test it or then actually monetize stuff from there. Right. I'm interested in who else, has data products running right now that they're happy with, and could tell us a little bit more about that story, if there's anyone online here.
This is brand new to everybody. They're all going to start doing it after this webinar.
Yes.
Well, maybe.
It's kind of new to. I came on here with. My name is Martin. I have a company called Invoke. We do email. We have an email marketing, 2 products, an email marketing tool, and we have a database for attribution, primarily for paid media. And I have thought about APIs as always. Remember attending a marketing conference where the CTO of Netflix said, "We won't buy a product if we can't get everything in the UI equivalent in an API." Mm-hmm. And so I have always thought in terms of an API is just a way that another computer can access something available in the UI. So just to your point, sorry, I see CSA there. I can't know your name,
oh,
but
Lindsay.
Sorry,
Lindsay. Sorry,
Lindsay.
Yeah.
The idea of a data product is kind of new to me. And one question I have about, so our challenges are getting the APIs up and running, getting the documentation done, making something available that's useful. Obviously, an email product is pay. You need to send a transactional email, use this. If you need to have, our newest one is permission management. How do you manage permissions? We can provide access for that. Here's my question then, in this new idea: is a data product always you're always aggregating information from multiple sources and bringing it together and then reselling it? Do you actually, or can a data product be within one company where you're taking information from that company, repackaging it, giving it back to them in APIs? So, I mean, I'm at that level where I'm really even trying to understand what an API-able data product would be and trying to get a handle on general principles. Is that a sorry?
That's a great question. I'll hand that one to Allan. Yeah,
Okay, right.
Yeah, because you said the word API-able, so that's
okay. All right, I'll take it then. I mean, I think that honestly, starting point is to stop kind of looking at your data and thinking about how you can, like, from inside out, get this stuff and put it out there and say it's a data product, and can I monetize it? You need to leave your office, speak to potential customers, and find out what pains they're having, and then loop that back to what data you have and if that data can solve that specific problem, right? And this is where we're going away from having APIs that just, like I said, they help instead of copy pasting from one system, as you mentioned, transactional APIs. We now have the possibility to solve problems, and that's the focus we should be having, right? So again, if you start at the data and try to just push it out and hope that someone will start using it, that's probably not going to work. But that's what we tried, right? We tried that, everyone's tried that, just publish everything you have as APIs and see if anyone takes it. It's never worked. If you start from, conversation with a customer about a problem they're having, and you have the data and means to solve that, then you will see success.
I'll take
sorry, can I just make a quick question about that though, specifically? It's just because if I think about the email, I got more, I mean, technically we have access to an awful lot of data. None of it belongs to me. None of it belongs to us. It belongs to the customers. That's what I mean by aggregating. And I'm struggling to figure out how, unless I change the terms of service, got the right to aggregate that information, and then could publish sort of generalized data. I mean, again, I'm right at the beginning of this, so forgive me if I'm struggling to catch up a little.
That's absolutely fine. I mean, the words we use is anonymize and aggregated, right? If you can anonymize and aggregate out to a certain degree, we had a data product at Swisscom which would actually use mobile phone data to track where people were moving, right? So it was extremely interesting to the cantons, so the regional offices, the councils, right, to see, okay, where do people come from into, like, for example, Zurich? They come during the morning. Where are they coming from? Where do we need to put more trains? When they get into Zurich, how are they moving around? Are they, like, at lunchtime all moving en masse to one area and back again? And we could provide that service, so long as we made it very clear that you cannot identify anybody with the data, right? So when it dropped below a certain number of people, so if some people were going back to a very small village in the mountains or something like this, and the data dropped below 10 people, we had to, like, cut the cord, right? And anonymized and aggregated is what we always went with, right? And that worked, and it was a very successful product. And again, product is the thing. We said, okay, our target customer are the regional cantons. We knew they had the money to pay for it. They paid for it, and that's what we did effectively.
Yeah.
Did the cell phone companies have to have it in their terms of service that they were allowed to do that, or is that, as long as it's anonymized, you don't need to do that?
It was in there. It was in there, yeah, yeah. And I'm quite certain. Yeah, I feel a little bit uncomfortable talking about it now, but yeah, it was definitely a conversation that had at like all levels of the organization, because again, telecommunications industry is one that's going declining revenues, and they were asking us to come up with new digital products so that we could get more revenue, or get our revenue back. And we had all this data, right? And there's a big discussion about whether we could use it or not. But eventually this was happening, right? And again, we weren't selling this data to McDonald's, right? So it was going back to the government, right? And that's also a very important part of saying, okay, you're a product, and who do you make it available to, and governance and regulation. And again, it's product management. Michael.
I have a similar story with a customer that's using Ascend. They're in a healthcare data business, so very sensitive data. They acquire that data from lots of different sources, from payers, from providers, insurers. And one of the things that they do right away is to apply, just like what Allan was saying, is an anonymization step that is in concert with the agreements that the provider has with its customers. So some of those data acquisition pieces are pretty specific. But then once those data sets are anonymized on the inbound, we have a mechanism called sharing that allows the developer of that data set to share that with other developers inside the company. This is for APIs. And then they can use that as a now generic data set, right? And they can start to aggregate across the different providers and the different sources and apply their magic that provides these insights for the marketplace. So this all happens long before they get data, they generate the data products that they literally resell. So they'll sell them to governments, they'll sell them to the ecosystem. And that's very much kind of an API ecosystem play of what they do with that. But all that digestion that happens inside that you're concerned about, Martin, that all happens internally, and it's governed by the internal rules of the business. What's cool about doing that cleanup and that aggregation step by step is it provides you the auditability, right? You can actually go look at that snippet of code that strips out or replaces or whatever anonymization method you're using, and you can see it, you can audit it, you can review it. And that's a key part. You might say that on paper, but somebody's going to come and say, so how does this code actually run? And that's what makes data products, like to actually define the data products and defining all the rules around that, super important, versus just letting a developer go at it and you end up with hundreds of tables. Nobody knows what's happening where. Does that help?
Thank you.
So Nikunj, if I got your name right, so tell us your story. What's your data story?
Yeah, so we are. I heard Kelly speak earlier, and I was checking out her company as well. And we are a low-code, no-code platform at Castio. We're more industry agnostic, and it's more actually an application development platform, but with strong database roots. And we have just been thinking of offering data, monetizing data for a while. We don't have anything really in production yet, so this is more just an ideation session for me, kind of just learning from others as to how they're going about their data journeys. So
makes sense. Yeah. Well, again, if you take one thing away from this, I guess it's I think we've been talking about value a lot, right? I think thinking of the value that you have in your database effectively, and how you can get that out by speaking to customers and partners and saying, okay, well, what are the problems you're having, and how can we solve them? And it can be as simple as saying, okay, look, we want to be able to just get the data, and instead of typing it in your system, we want to build a page and just have it in ours, right? I mean, that's a very simple API case, but the API products or data products we're building now are much more complex than that. one topic I wanted to sort of touch upon a little bit as well while we're here, and maybe, I mean, Kelly might be a good candidate for this one, and that's security. How are you securing your data products?
Yeah, so I don't know if I can answer this correctly, but at the end of the day, so one of the ways that we are, we do have some, obviously we're SOC 2 compliant, but what we're really doing is we don't store the data. So everything's based on a call. Once we return that information, we don't hold that data. Specifically for some of our recent life events our API focuses on data that helps the renewal piece of insurance to how do you understand maybe who's recently had a life event in their life, for example, newly married, newly divorced, new house, etc. We don't return information specifically, so we give every single person within our database a unique identifier, and then we return that data when you call the API, and I'm not technical, so just bear with me here. Okay. We return it with a unique identifier and only that event that has happened. We don't return information back with date of birth, etc. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but we don't hold on to it. Once we return it in an API call, it exists, it's gone. That's another reason why we do charge by the call. So if you called the same person the same time, if you sent that same request in, we would charge you twice for that call. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's a very interesting, and it all ties up. I mean, obviously, especially in Europe with the GDPR stuff that we have here, we've had to think this way for a while now, and I think the US has caught up a lot with that, and Canada. Getting there, yeah, slowly. But it's really what we saw, especially in 2020 during the COVID lockdown, is a lot of companies kind of scrambled because they couldn't, get in front of their customers. They basically accelerated their digital transformations, and they put a lot of APIs out there, and they never thought about this kind of stuff. They didn't think about, also the technical securing of the API as well. What we saw in 2020 was a lot of vulnerabilities, and a lot of hackers probably also sitting at home bored were like seeing what they could hack and get into different systems. So it's really something that you want to go back and have a bit of a look at, and especially Martin and Nikunj, if you're thinking about going on your API journey, don't use just an API key. I'm getting a little bit technical here, but it's slightly technical. There's a thing called an API key, which is a bit misleading in its naming, because you think it's a key and you think, okay, it's a secure thing, right? But it's not. It's just an identifier of the person who is supposed to be making the call, right? So you give it to one of your partners and say, there you go. And it just helps you to understand who made the API call. It's in no way secure, right? And that in the industry is something that we've seen and are trying to correct, because there's a whole suite of security measures you can take with OAuth, etc. So worth having a quick look at what you're doing there before you get started, right? Or yeah, Kelly, if you already started, maybe just post that question to one of your, developers or something to say, okay, how are we really securing this stuff? And just make sure it's locked down, because we saw so many vulnerabilities over the last 2 years. And the solutions are out there, right? In the underlying API management systems, the whole securing with APIable as well. We've got that security layer. It's all done basically, but we need to spread that word, which is why I'm mentioning it here as well.
That raises a really good point, and you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but with that security in mind and maintaining those APIs, is there ever a situation where there's too many API products, where too much data is just too much data to maintain? How do you go about deciding which products you should focus on and where you should leave it?
Right. Many companies, when they, organizations, when they first start their API journey, they get everything they've got, and they put it all out in one go, right? That's what everybody does, right? And then that's where you have like version 1. Then they do like a version 2 of their APIs, and they start to, categorize things in a little bit, better detail and group things logically together and so on. But it's basically like just an evolution of that. Then what we see when they hit like this epiphany, and that's why I'm trying to give you a bit of a shortcut here as well, is that when you start treating your APIs as products, what will happen then is you'll say, okay, we're trying to solve a specific user journey use case with APIs. And then it's not necessarily just one API using, one set of data. It could be 2 APIs or 3 or 4 grouped together to solve this case, right? And it's exactly like what Michael was saying earlier with the data pipelines that they have as well. They went from having like, the star diagrams, I think he was saying, to saying, okay, now we think in terms of customers, right? So we think in terms of like user journeys. And it's exactly the same thinking with the APIs as well. So you do kind of reduce from your initial V1. When you get to like V3 APIs, you can see it's logically come right down to products containing one or more APIs, whatever's necessary to get the job done.
So you could cast a wide net and then curate from there.
It's what most people do. And if you can kind of skip V1 and V2 APIs and go straight to V3, then you've won, right? that's what we try and, teach people now, or just, open their mind to the concept of there even being like these V3 product APIs. And like, it does take a bit of rethinking. I mean, it's nice to hear Kelly's already there with, that's their product and that's how they treat it. Like a lot of companies treat, APIs as integrations, right? Just pure integrations, and that's not the way you should do it.
There's actually a bit of a corollary to the internal parts that are building the data pipelines, and that's like the leftover data, right? You've got stuff working, you got a bunch of test data, and then now the pipeline's running and you're delivering data. Behind the scenes, you actually get like a bunch of junk data that or it's costing you money because it's stored somewhere. And so this cleanup, this garbage collection of bad data and actually making a judgment call, oh, I need to keep this one because somebody's going to audit it. And these other 5 data sets I can throw away because they're just interim. That's a key, just to speak to your like, just where does all this data come from and how do I wrap my arms around it? Just breaking that down a little bit. It's a part of data governance anyway. But a lot of times systems aren't built to handle that, right? All you know is like you've got 1,000 tables in Snowflake that are costing you a crap lot of money, but you don't actually know where to start cleaning it up. So using platforms that are designed to actually handle that and track that and identify that and maybe even actively clean up after the data pipeline is something that we recognize that problem. It's built into our platform, but that's why I'm so familiar with that problem. And it's measurable as business impact.
This is a little, and if we need to take this offline potentially, but I'm curious. So we have developer resources that someone can quickly come in and leverage artificial, developer data, I'll say, to kind of first see what kind of data is there. I'm curious what best practices or maybe what people are doing to get developers, interested in the data. Is there, while yes, a lot of it's just, reaching out to people, doing discoveries around partnerships, which is obviously what I'm focused on, but I'm curious if there's something that is really working within the API data, scenario where getting people to access that developer data will allow us to, revenue sooner. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that or if it's not appropriate. I understand.
That's a question. Allan, actually, do you deal with sandboxes and do you have strategies in your APIs to deal with sandboxes?
Sandboxes are a little challenging because my CTO doesn't really like them because someone comes in, they change them. It's a lot of work, which is why we have a developer data, credentials that we provide. So it's not a sandbox. It's I don't know what the technical term is, honestly, but
Like a demo account, maybe?
yeah, like we provide credentials. You get access to our developer data files, so you know how to, input the data, what it returns. So you're not just putting, like, for example, my name isn't in the artificial data file. So you know how to, how it works and what attributes it returns and data files. Anyways, I'm just curious. Besides, yes, I'm familiar with sandboxes. Is there anything else that anyone's doing that is helpful?
I mean, one thing that we did recently for an insurance customer was a demo app. So, I mean, they have a very specific case though, where they're actually trying to sell into a specific industry. And so we built an app that, it's partly functional, right? But the advantage of that is that they could then go to a customer. They were having a challenge because, I mean, again, you've mentioned developer a few times there, where the decision maker on whether or not an API should be used is not necessarily the developer. I find it quite often, right? So we build these developer portals, make it very technical, right? But then the poor person who has to make the decision is not technical and is like, I don't know what to do here, right? So that's what they found as well. So they're speaking to like CEO to CEO level here. And the CEO is like, okay, well, I don't understand any of this developer portal stuff, right? So they created this demo app, and then they could sit next to one another and click next. And we also built it in a way that you can see the API call. So if there is a technical person in the call, you can like click a button and it shows you what's happening with the API at this point. Then you click and you go back to the demo. And the demo app leads you through the 4 or 5 screens in an e-commerce process in this case. That leads to the aha moment from the CEO, who is the decision maker in this case, right? He's like, oh, okay, now I get what you're trying to do, because he could visualize it. So that has been like wildly popular. It's quite difficult for us to scale, and we're trying to think about how to do that. But we basically just put a developer behind it to build it. But that was really good. That was like a very again, it comes back to that point that it's solving a specific problem for, a customer target segment, right? And that's what I'd advise, like, if you've got a huge stack of data, just try and find like, burning problems that you're solving for your customers. And maybe this whole demo app thing is something you could also employ that, and again, within your developer portal. In fact, I don't call them developer portals on purpose. I call them API portals to say, okay, I have basically 2 journeys. I have one which is for the decision maker, who is, CEO, product manager, or someone in the organization who is responsible for making that business decision. And that's where we try and push the value proposition of it. And we try not to use the word API and JSON and wherever. And then we flip a switch and we go like really full on developer when the developer gets invited to say, okay, yeah, we want to do this. And then the developer has that journey. So also that kind of thinking as well.
Well, I also think, Kelly, to your point, around conversations with partners and customers, we talked about this on our last roundtable as well, getting that internal feedback and those stakeholders within your team to make a case for these products from this data set. So I've seen a lot of success in companies that I've worked with, having somebody on your partnership team communicate with somebody on product and development, and then also somebody on C-suite who's leading new initiatives throughout the company to really push it through. And Allan, to your point, to be able to see and have that aha moment from the CEO's perspective or the partnership manager's perspective, to be able to figure out why that data is important and why to monetize it is incredibly productive throughout a company. Really making sure that everybody on every level is understanding why this data is something that could become a product and could become monetized.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much to Allan and Michael for leading this roundtable with us. We're always looking for new topics. So if you have any, drop them in Slack and let me know. We get a lot of our ideas from these roundtables, and that's how we plan the next ones. As I mentioned at the beginning, we do have SaaS Connect UK coming up November 17th. So if you're in the area and you're not registered, definitely please register for that event. Or if you have colleagues in the area who would benefit from a great SaaS Connect, partnership leaders, definitely send them the information there. And we will see everybody at our next roundtable.
Thank you,
Lindsay.
Thanks so
Glad to
much,
be here.
guys.